and while I was talking about guides giving messages, a phone rang. And the host apologized. I'm so sorry, I thought I'd unplugged that phone, and went over and picked it up and had a look at it. There was nobody there, and found that he had unplugged it.
Okay.
But it rang.
Yeah.
And that was his, these are things, these things happen. And I do think psychic powers can be proved to you, as it won't prove it to anyone else, because somebody watching this could say, well, that's a good yarn Richard Lawrence has come up with there. Yeah. Where's the evidence? Where's the proof? Etc. Fair enough. I'm not interested in that, actually. What I'm interested in doing is helping people, and what we're interested in, not just me, to get their own proof.
Exactly.
And you can get it.
Exactly.
The Spiritual Freedom Show with Richard Lawrence, where politics is not the answer, materialism counts for nothing, and spirituality will set you free.
Great to be with you, Darren.
Hear me out on this one today, because I think there's a lot to unpack in it. I think it's an interesting one. I've also got a comment that came in, a question from one of our listeners that I'd like to share as well.
Okay, can we just remind people that I don't know what you're going to say, what you've got there. It's completely spontaneous, which I much prefer. I think it's the best way to do this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you do have questions or comments that you'd like to share, it's spiritualfreedom@richardlawrence.co.uk. Do write in. We'd love to share them on the show as part of what we're doing here. So this person starts, feel like I'm 50% spiritual. Okay. To me, this is what they say. Spirituality is about healing, trauma, cultivating self-awareness, aligning oneself with truth, dropping your mask, and embracing connection to humanity and the world. That is the 50% that I believe in. Then you have the long list of unfalsifiable claims that defines the other 50%. Reincarnation, pantheism, psychic powers, numerology, synchronicity, starseeds, etc. It's impossible to prove these things are false, and as a person who has experienced psychotic breaks due to past trauma, they are distortions of reality which promote magical thinking. Does anyone else seriously question these beliefs and focus instead on just a personal journey of growth and healing? Thank you very much. So I think there's a lot in there.
There really is, yes.
Maybe we can start with, this person is kind of saying, well, they kind of just want to throw out the reincarnation, the psychic powers, the numerology, synchronicity, starseed and stuff, because they feel that these are unfalsifiable. And maybe we can talk a little bit about, how would you begin to prove these to yourself, either through experience or logic or intuition? So.
Well, let me pick one of those out, which is psychic powers. And that's something I've done. I realized, and the reason I wrote a book called Unlock Your Psychic Powers, 30 years ago this year actually, it's still in print, which is great, and not just in this country. But the reason I did that is because I realized by then that I'd already been teaching for some while, and that until people experienced it themselves, they never really knew. So most evidence that people seek is sort of observable evidence under so-called scientific conditions.
Right.
But spiritual evidence can be gleaned by the individual themselves if they have the correct approach, let's put it that way. Now, this person who wrote this mentioned they'd had psychotic incidents.
Right.
So, there is a warning, definitely, about psychic powers and mental health. And I think we've covered it before on the Spiritual Freedom Show more than once. Because you've got to be able to tell the difference between imagination and genuine psychic powers. And one thing I always say to people when I've taught many people actually to give psychic readings, even going back some years, you've got to be able to say 3 words. I don't know. It's not a competition. You aren't there to prove yourself to people. If they don't believe you, it's fine. Who cares, really? But you've got to know. And if you don't know, you say, I don't know. You don't. And I've been on the radio with psychics who felt the need to be able to answer every question. And somehow if they can't answer every question, then they've failed as a psychic.
Yeah.
No, you haven't. There's some things you're given. There's some things you're not given. There's some things you're not meant to be given. But I do come back to somebody, and I do think you need to be in a good mental condition, let's say, or a reasonably good mental condition to do this, because there is a danger, of course, of uncontrolled imagination and people who think they're hearing voices who aren't, and the many things we know of. But if you are of, shall we say, balanced mind when you do it, and you are focused and you're using concentration, that's vital to concentrate, it's not stressed nearly enough, you will experience it. It is, I think the word there was unfalsifiable. I'm not sure whether that's what was meant exactly.
Not sure.
Whether the person means that you can't really deny, you can't prove it wrong. Of course you can prove it wrong when people say things that are facts that turn out not to be facts.
True. Yeah.
But if you're doing it yourself, and let's talk about the very best thing you could do, namely healing, which is a psychic ability, actually,
totally.
and is described as such in the 9 Freedoms. It's also described as the best release from psychic frustration, because we all have psychic frustration. You will then experience the energy as a thing. You'll know, and in time, you'll know that when you're focused on healing, the energy in the palms of your hands might be very hot, might be kind of tingling, might be a number of things, but it's much more powerful when you're focused on it, and when you switch off, which you need to be able to do, switch on and switch off in all psychic work, it's less powerful. Might not go completely, but it's a different feeling. You can register these things, but I would sort of put it as, if you like, your own spiritual laboratory.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah,
The exact words.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's a test. Don't worry if you don't know straight away. In fact, that's probably a good thing. Just give yourself time. Try it out. But in time, with all these things, I mean, there's another thing which is recommended in the 9 Freedoms, something that a person can do which will affect them psychically. I think it's called Psychic Man Can Do This, is practice, which of course man is the old-fashioned man, by the way. It's not the way we use the word now. It's all people, male, female, and so on. But is what we would call breathing exercises. But what it really is the control of the universal life forces, control of prana. That's something else you can feel, and that's a psychic experience you can have. And then you'll have, if you go down this route, psychic vision. You might have psychic hearing. You're not here, if you do have psychic, and that's something I've developed, you're not hearing a physical voice, but you're getting thoughts which are molded by if you like, the mind's ear as opposed to the mind's eye. It's molded by a sound and intonation. If, for example, you were to be able to receive, I don't know, a communication from John Lennon, let's take a famous person. I'm not saying you should do this or that you will do this, but if it did happen and you were clairaudient, you had psychic hearing, you wouldn't just get some thoughts coming into your brain, which you're receiving, they're not yours, and you can tell the difference with that too. You would hear perhaps a Liverpudlian accent, you'd be a familiar, or let's say Winston Churchill, another famous one, but you'd have the intonation of the way he spoke and so on would come to you in your mind's ear, as it were.
I remember we were talking in the past, and you shared an experience of receiving a poem once, and I think that was a great illustration of being able to distinguish between, what's your own thoughts and what's going on outside of you.
Yes, exactly. So this is just an example which isn't proof to anybody other than me, or people who know me, who know I wouldn't make it up. But anyone could say, I've just made the story up, so it's not proof. But this happened. Quite early on when I was channeling, I got a poem. Now, I got this, I think, somewhere between 3 and maybe 5 minutes, that length of time, and was writing it down quite quickly. I don't enter trance when I do channeling. I think that trance should not be used at all in channeling. This might be a bit controversial, unless you can enter somatic trance. Right. That's my opinion. That's probably going even further maybe than Dr. King went, although I think that's the implication of what he meant. And he of course did enter somatic trance, hence he received the 9 Freedoms and other teachings. But in my case, I don't do that, so I'm receiving it. It's very difficult. You've got to concentrate so much that all you're thinking about is the words. You might be hearing it as well, which is another way of identifying it's not coming from you, it's coming from outside of you. You're not in a relaxed, vague state where you just switch your mind off and see what happens, not at all. You're very intensely focused, and you're focusing only on the words. And the reason I mention that is You're right, I was writing these words down very quickly without thinking what they really meant.
Okay.
And I wrote them down. And when I finished, I later became aware of who had given them to me, these words. And neither of them were people I'd heard of. One was called William Davenant, and the other was called Fulk Greville. And I mean, although I did study, Shakespeare and Ben Jonson, some people, those are kind of lesser known poets stroke playwrights from that same 17th century period. So I hadn't heard their names before. So that's one little thing. You think, okay, that person did exist.
Yeah.
But what was the key was that when I actually looked at this poem, it rhymed. Now, to do anyone who's written songs or poetry with rhymes in them knows you've got to stop and think of a rhyme sometimes. Now, what can rhyme with joy, boy, whatever. There was none of that going on. I was just getting the words, writing them down. In the end, they rhymed. They were in couplets that rhymed. And then I think it was couplets, either every other line or every 2 lines. I'm not sure which, but it's published actually, this poem, in God's Guides and Guardian Angels. Then I found that it was, looking this up, in iambic tetrameters, which again, I didn't know that phrase, but some vaguely heard of iambic somewhere.
Yeah.
But that was a form that was used in the 17th century. And then some of the words in there, for example, knave, they weren't words I didn't know. They were just words I wouldn't use. But I found they were all 17th century, some of these unusual words, ne'er-do-wells, and this type of phrase. Yeah.
Okay.
And so I absolutely could not have sat down between 3 and 5 minutes and ended up with a rhyming poem in iambic tetrameters with 17th century language and then get the names of the people who gave it. That would be completely impossible. So I know that was genuine. I'm not saying it's the greatest poem ever given. Actually, it's a very nice poem, but it was, to me, absolute, if I needed it, absolute proof. And I must admit, with psychic things, I do like to get proof, but it's proof for myself.
Right.
And, I've had people, I'll give you an example, though. I ran a workshop at a festival for mind, body, spirit, and we did some psychometry. This is a very good way to develop psychic powers. And what I did, I brought some rocks back from somewhere. I didn't tell people where these rocks came from. And we distributed them among the audience, about 150 people there. They were all, plenty, they had rocks. One person in the audience, as I asked what feedback they got, and it was, vaguely like the sea, the this, the that, you could think, okay, fine. One person said, Damer Bay. Now that's a fairly small beach in Cornwall, and that's where the rocks came from.
Wow.
And this was a person who wasn't claiming to be a psychic.
Yeah.
They'd walked into a workshop.
And that's just
and they got the bay.
From that. Wow.
And the odds of that, even with 150 people, of anyone getting them, and they could have come from anywhere in Britain.
That's 1 in a million.
Or even not a bay. They could have come from London, for all anyone knew.
Wow.
So it's things like that. Those things happened quite a lot. I'll just give you another example. I was giving a workshop once, and I was in someone's home running it. And the hosts were there. And while I was talking about guides giving messages, a phone rang. And the host apologized. I'm so sorry, I thought I'd unplugged that phone, and went over and picked it up and had a look at it. There was nobody there, and found that he had unplugged it.
Okay.
But it rang.
Yeah.
And that was his, these are things, these things happen. And I do think psychic powers can be proved to you, as it won't prove it to anyone else, because somebody watching this could say, well, that's a good yarn Richard Lawrence has come up with there. Yeah. Where's the evidence? Where's the proof? Etc. Fair enough. I'm not interested in that, actually. What I'm interested in doing is helping people, and what we're interested in, not just me, to get their own proof.
Exactly.
And you can get it.
Exactly. I think that's great. One other thing, going back to this original thing that really struck me, actually, as I thought about it again, is a lot of the things they talk about, which is the 50% that they can accept, are actually more about psychology than they are about spirituality per se.
Yeah.
He's talking about cultivating self-awareness, dropping your mask, healing trauma. All those things are actually, that's your personal psychological development. Whereas these other things that we're talking about here is developing psychic powers and whatnot. that's going one step further, I believe, and some people find that difficult to accept because they don't really understand. Well, how is it even possible?
Yeah, but for what I would say though, this person says I think they're 50% spiritual, right?
Yeah.
That's a lot more than most people.
That's true.
That's something you can work
great
with.
Personal awareness and all
Just
that.
get 1% and you're over the barrier then, and you're on your way, well on your way.
Yeah.
So, but I don't want to make light of it. But
Sure.
Of course, people are all of us. None of us are 100%. My goodness me. It's all building and building and building, and it will grow and grow and grow. And you'll realize more and more and more. And as we do realize more and more, and we go more down that line. And another thing I'd say too is that you could be doing some fairly ordinary menial task or profession, which you have to do to earn money or whatever, and it could be part of your spiritual life. It's not like I'm now spiritual, it's 5 p.m. 6 p.m. I'm off duty, now I can be spiritual. This is a 24-hour-a-day thing, including in your sleep. That's a point that's made several times in here by Mars Sector 6.
How do you explain psychic powers, I guess, briefly?
Yeah, I mean, they are part of the journey, and they'll come in one way or another, depending on the path we're on. So to one person, it might be a vision of Virgin Mary. To another person, it might be a Dakini, which is an Eastern yogic concept. There are many, many ways you can have these. To some, it's a light in the third eye that they're seeing. May not actually be the third eye, but it's the beginnings of starting to see the third eye. There's so many ways you can have psychic powers. But what I would say is this: there will come a time for all of us when we will have to develop psychic. There's a great paradox here, actually, and Dr. King explains it brilliantly. We develop psychic powers in order to give them up. Now, let me be clear here. Psychic powers that help others should not be given up. They're there to be used. If you develop great powers of healing, great powers of prayer, and prayer isn't just like, people don't realize that prayer is something you can develop. You know that. I know that.
Yeah, totally.
It's not a passive, neutral thing that as long as you say a certain form of words, even if you're kind of yawning when you say them, it's still going to be the same. No.
It's a skill.
It's what energy, what power, what focus you put behind it.
Totally.
These things can all be developed. So they won't be given up, but there'll come a moment where in order to move on to even higher stage than psychic powers, you have to let them go. You have to even let inspiration go. It could be a really great inspiration, by the way, a very powerful one. You could be having very good prophetic powers at that moment, but that's not your intent. So it's not necessarily you're giving up bad things. There'll come a point when you have to give up even these good abilities to move on to something even greater. In this book, in the fourth freedom, it's described as the transmutation of mental energies upon the plane of inspiration called high intuition. That's from memory. You can check me on that. I think those are the words. But this is the point you reach when you're about to enter enlightenment. And then you have to let even that go. It all has to go. Psychic powers, even inspiration. This is what makes it something even greater, shall we say, than the great creative geniuses of history who didn't reach that stage. I'm not saying none of them did, but those who didn't. They're still tied to the mentality of their genius. It's a great thing, great literature, great music, great art, great science, in many ways. But there will come a point where to really, as it were, move into enlightenment, to know God, to really bring about the highest realizations, even that will have to go, will have to be detached from. So it's a strange paradox. You develop psychic powers in terms of your own progression, almost so that you can get to the stage where you move beyond them.
Yeah.
But as I say, what's more important is service. That's the main thing, more important even than our own development by a long chalk. That's a big theme in the 9 freedoms. And psychic powers, let's look at it this way. If you're more intuitive, you'll make better decisions.
Yeah.
You'll be able to help others who want to listen to you to make better decisions. If you're able to see more about a person clairvoyantly or clairaudiently, again, you can help them more if they wish to be helped by you. and particularly you can heal better. So they are abilities that can be used in service. There'll come a point where if they're just development things, they can go really. You've done that, you've been there, you've got to your stage. They've got to be used in service. But as I want to stress, at some point though, you'll need to move even beyond that.
Yeah, I think it's a great glimpse into the future of what we can develop. But yes, that we can develop them, number one, but that at some point we move beyond them, and then we have these outstanding experiences that you just described. I thought we'd finish here with a question that someone wrote into the show, which I think relates back to these experiences that we're talking about here. And see what you think about this. So they say, hi, maybe you can explain what this means. I awoke abruptly in the middle of the night and witnessed a gold-colored light extended around the perimeter of my body, followed by the sensation of being pulled out of my body.
Well, I can't be dogmatic, so I'm going to try and sort of tune in a bit to this person, because it could mean different things. First of all, it sounds to me to be a good thing. Gold is the most wonderful spiritual. It symbolizes the essence of the ancients would say Brahma, wisdom, if you like. It's a wonderful thing. So it doesn't sound like any kind of interference. So if that's the case, it would either be they were being pulled out by themselves, but they didn't necessarily feel like that, or there's a guide there, an angel, depending what you want to call it, someone from another realm who's friendly and helpful, trying to help you to leave your body, because that's what one does when one sleeps. Very often, one leaves one's body and has an experience, an out-of-body or experience, or an astral projection. And maybe this person was being helped to do it for a particular reason. Maybe there was somewhere for them to go at that moment, and somebody wanted them to go there, or they knew they had to go there. So there was a bit of an urgency to it, hence the feeling of being pulled out. Having said that, when you do first, and this is very common, I saw a poll once, which was, I think, something like 10% of people have had an out-of-body experience, and that was in Britain at the time, which they remember. It could even be a higher figure than that. This isn't, just a few cranks. This is millions of people around the world.
That's millions.
Yeah. And it's something that can happen to you. And you're just lying in bed at night, and suddenly, rather than just closing your eyes and go to sleep, you actually feel yourself. You're looking down at your body. I know there's going to be people watching this now who'll say, yeah, that's happened to me. They maybe have never told anyone. And this is what's happening. You're leaving your body in order to go about some other experiences. So dreams are very misunderstood. And sometimes nobody misunderstands dreams more than dream interpreters.
And on that note, we'll bring it to go to close. Thank you again, Richard.
Hey everybody, it's Darren here. Thanks for tuning into the show. Now, if you enjoyed that episode, don't forget to subscribe for more wisdom from the 9 Freedoms. If you'd like to find out more about the 9 Freedoms, about Mars Sector 6 by Dr. George King, go to our website, that's aetherius.org. Richard and I love hearing from you, receiving your comments, your questions on your spiritual experiences, and talking about them on the show. So do write to us, share them with us at spiritualfreedom@richardlawrence.co.uk. Always remember that service is the jewel in the rock of attainment. See you next time.